It was at a 25th wedding anniversary party that I heard for the first time the expression virtue signaling. It is an act of publicly expressing moral attitudes or stances, largely to communicate one's own moral standing, rather than necessarily to effect substantive change. It describes the actions of those who post or hashtag a cause without doing much more. It is about seeking to be seen on the right side of a debate, rather than the deeper work of transformation, humility, or service. Irish journalist Kathy Sheridan writes that virtue signalling drowns us in hopelessness. Organizations from NGOs to private enterprises increasingly adopt the rhetoric of purpose, values, social responsibility. Yet without genuine follow-through, this shifts into virtue signalling. Irish independent journalist Owen Skehan writes about how Ireland's planning system has ditched common sense for virtue signalling. This weekend's parable in Luke's Gospel is about the Pharisee and the tax collector. It is a story which contrasts someone confident in their own virtue and judging others with someone humble and aware of need. The character who displays humility goes home justified. This parable warns that virtue signaling feeds a spiritual danger, where performing virtue is deemed more important than being virtuous, where signaling is given greater status than serving. This weekend's parable calls for authenticity, vulnerability, and service. Luke's gospel promotes substance over spectacle, service over status, humility over hype. Social media facilitates causes being championed. It creates audiences so that hashtags are shared, while polishing personal brands so that individuals can look virtuous. The reading from the book of Sirach is a provocative challenge to virtue signaling. Sirach emphasizes that God is just and not swayed by eternal appearances or status. Sirach reminds us that God hears the cry of the humble, especially the poor, and that true prayer is not loud or showy, but sincere and humble. It pierces the clouds. Psalm 34 is a psalm composed by David, crafted at a time when David pretended to be insane to escape danger. The psalm recounts how David, in a moment of humiliation, blesses the Lord in a prayer that surfaces from a place of dependence, humility, and honest desperation. The psalm is a powerful countercultural message to a world where hashtags are used to show outrage, but where often people in pain around us are ignored, where we proclaim justice but won't inconvenience ourselves to live it, where there's pressure to appear virtuous even when our hearts are far from it. In an era where we are drowning in image over substance, where we are under pressure to broadcast our convictions rather than embody them in hidden faithfulness, St. Paul relays a powerful message. In his letter to Timothy, Paul encourages faithfulness and not performance. In 2025, we can craft spiritual identity partly by what we tag. At times we practice spiritual selfies of ourselves when on retreat or doing yoga. Our Instagram is sometimes filled with inspirational quotes when often compassion, integrity, and self-honesty is in short supply. Hashtag spirituality is not inherently bad. Hashtags can connect, inspire, invite. But when the tag becomes the thing, when the imagery wins over the encounter, when the feed becomes the measure of faith, we risk losing the radical, vulnerable, hidden life of the Spirit. The sacred is not served by a perfect photo or clever captions. It is served by a heart turned, by a hand outreached, by a life hidden and honest. True virtue is quiet. It does not announce itself. Overconfidence in virtue signaling exasperates self-righteousness. Cyric counsels that God listens to hearts, not hashtags. St. Paul reminds us to prioritize faithfulness over performance. Psalm 34 exhorts us to taste and see and not perform and pretend. Amen.